Hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got a great chat coming up as we're going to be joined today by Blake Lovell, who does such amazing work over at Southeastern 16, looking at all things SEC, but he does a great job in terms of the entire landscape of college basketball. We'll take a look at one or two sleeper teams outside the SEC with him towards the back half of the conversation. Here for the first half, we certainly do have to take a look at some of these teams of intrigue. Obviously, we've got a lot of history with LSU, there's no question about it, but we have some mystery as well with Alabama, with the Aiden Holloway situation, how that's all developing. We're going to chat with them about some of the teams that are bringing back quite a bit from the season ago and the teams that are not bringing back quite a bit. And I want to dive in on Texas A&M as well because they had one of the bigger offseason signings of PJ Haggerty. It is a bunch, though, that, as we know, last year it was a little bit more holes greater than some of its parts. You now bring in a 19-plus point per game scorer in PJ Haggerty. How is that going to be looking for Texas A&M? So we'll dive in on that. Some of the teams are bringing back quite a bit, like a Georgia and so much more. So we're going to be filling it up with SEC conversation and fun today. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Guden_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire on whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And yes, I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please send in those Twitter/X questions. That lets me know what you want to be talking about here in the off season. That gives me just a chance in general to be able to focus on that a little bit more, and it makes the off season go by a little bit more easily as well. So I do appreciate that. And all throughout this off season, you're going to continue to get great guest conversations and great guests that join me, like our good friend Blake Lovell, who does such pristine work over at Southeastern 16, who you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Greg.
Blake, it is always a pleasure. And now we're in the middle of June. Most of these rosters are filled out, but who knows? LSU, they might try to find eligibility for Shaquille O'Neal at this point. You just never know there. But is there anything that you are taking a look at in terms of roster building out there in the SEC? Because one thing that has caught my attention is that South Carolina, of all teams, have won very much international. They brought in a 23-year-old Hugo. I am forgetting the last name, but he was playing out there in the country of Spain. And that feels like one roster where they might have some unfinished business and they might be trying to be able to find a few diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, you would think so. And I think Hugo Lopez, you mentioned the guy that international. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's someone like South Carolina who, as we know, has sort of just been trying to claw its way back to being anywhere close to what it was, several seasons ago. And it was right there in the SEC title race after being picked last and all that. I think, too, it's right. It's just NIL perspective. Like, I don't think South Carolina is able right now to be able to compete, with the top teams that are spending the most, whether that's Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, whoever. And so I think from that perspective, like, you have to get a little bit creative, especially if you're someone like Lamont Paris, who, is trying to perhaps, coach for his job and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I think South Carolina, in all honesty, like, if you look at this state of the SEC, they may be a little bit under the radar right now just because they're a team that not many people, are going to have high expectations for necessarily. But I think their roster is a lot better than it was last year, at least on paper right now. And so I think teams like that, and like you said, you're certainly seeing a lot of these teams go the international route. I mean, LSU is the perfect example of it to the extreme side of things. But Auburn has made a significant addition, when you talk about kind of bringing people in. I mean, Florida's brought people in. Like, you keep going down the list, right? Kentucky speaks for itself. And so I think from that perspective, of course, Arkansas in that mix, pretty much everybody, it feels like they're going to be in that title picture, at least probably have an international guy somewhere that's going to play a key role. So, yeah, that's definitely been something that stood out in the SEC. And, we'll see how it kind of pays off, especially, again, waiting on to see, how many of these players will actually be able to play.
Yep, that is going to be very interesting, especially on the LSU side of things, which I don't know how many of those guys are going to be able to get eligible when you're grabbing guys from the 2020 NBA draft and you're grabbing guys from the G League when their On3 graphic have on their multiple NBA teams probably not the route that you want to be going for college basketball. But you know what? I am not the person that makes the rules. We are just the people that try to be able to decipher it all. And Blake Lovell does a great job at deciphering this great sport of college basketball. Joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and LSU, no doubt about it, has the most question marks with regards to their roster, but Alabama does as well, because the Aiden Holloway situation is certainly going on. I know that he's in some sort of like a second chance program, if I'm not mistaken. And how are you taking a look at things with Alabama right now? Because right now, his just eligibility, how much he's going to be able to contribute for this team is a big giant question mark, which I thought made Amari Allen returning from the NBA draft all the more important for this team.
Yeah, that's a great point because Alabama, if you take Aiden Holloway out of the picture, which again, I'd say right now, I would project that he'll be on the team and he'll play and, probably be an all SEC type player. That would be my guess right now. But the thing is, if you look beyond him, this is a team that probably is going to lean on a lot of underclassmen. And I think that is something we're like in this era, we're not used to that necessarily, where, you're looking at a team and saying, well, there are not a lot of those guys who are super seniors or whatever. Like, this just isn't a team that's really built that way, at least at what you would expect to be the most productive positions. Their front court is a little bit, more experienced, whether it's, of course, someone like Brandon Garrison, you got Drew Fielder coming in, guys like that. But that's where, again, you look at Amari Allen returning. You've got, the freshman combination, Richardson, Samuels, all those guys. You're expecting, can someone like London Jemison as a sophomore take a leap forward? So I think that's what stands out to me with the Alabama roster is maybe this one's a little bit different in that you're banking on really a little bit more of the youth kind of taking over in that regard, because of course they are going to expect big things out of those freshmen. But still, if we're saying, okay, Alabama gets back to the Sweet 16 or perhaps they make another run to the Final Four, the difference could just simply be having Aiden Holloway or having, someone like Amari Allen making his return. So I think Alabama, one of the more intriguing teams in the SEC right now. And, it wouldn't surprise anyone, I think, if once again Nate Oates has a team that competes right up there for an SEC title. It's just this one may look a little bit different than the ones they've had, the past couple of years.
Yep, I think that it is going to be a little bit of a different looking team. And we've talked about this a lot with Alabama on the podcast the last few seasons. And I wanted to discuss this with you as well. Do you think that there's been a little bit more of an approach to try to be able to bulk up the defense this season? Because when they were the one seed in the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago, because Alabama plays so fast, I don't think a lot of people actually knew that they were one of the most efficient defensive teams in all of college basketball. You mentioned the fact that they bring in Drew Fielder. I thought that Kenton Briso, who he didn't play a ton last year because he was dealing with an injury. But that said, when he was out there, he was pretty rock solid. This just feels like a better defensive team than it's been in the past. And maybe the three-point shooting is going to leave a little bit more to be desired than it has in the past as well.
Yeah, and I think if you're, an Alabama fan, you're like, we can always bank on the offense. I mean, they've been a top 5 offensive team the past 3 years, and it's helped, having a guy, at the point guard position, whether it's Sears, whether it's Phylon, guys like that who have really been able to just push things the way that they have. But yes, they got to a Final Four in there. They got to an Elite Eight, get to the Sweet 16 last year. If you really want to feel like you have the best chance, again, to get to a Final Four, compete for a national championship, those defensive numbers have to improve and I think be more consistent. And that's where, a couple of years ago, they were top 30 or so defensively in that team that got to the Elite Eight. The Final Four team was the big outlier because throughout the year, their defense was simply not good, but it got better as they kind of went through that run. But once again, their offense was so good, it really didn't matter how many points they give up. They were just going to outscore a lot of people. And so, the closest combination they've had, and of course, the best defensive team, I think, was certainly that year, in 2023. And that was the team that was the number 1 overall seed and all that. And their defense was stellar. So we'll see. Sub top 60 basically last year. I think that's always going to be something that can hold you back. So I think they'll be a much improved defensive team. But like I said, if you think about it, it is still a team that's going to rely on underclassmen. And so how quickly does that defensive element come along versus maybe how quicker the offense is going to come along based on kind of the skill sets of all these guys? That'll be something to watch. And what's going to be a very good offensive league in the SEC, especially when you look at some of the talent that's on these rosters elsewhere.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I'm very intrigued to see how that's all going to be coming together this year as Blake Lovell, who does such amazing work over at Southeastern 16, he is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I know that, Blake, you were diving into this over the last few days over on your podcast, over on just your Twitter/X feed in general, taking a look at the returning talent that's going to be in for the SEC, because a lot of these rosters are mix and match. Obviously, with Florida, they are completely running it back. They have pretty much everything other than Walter Clayton from the title team game of 2 years ago back in the fall. But how do you take a look at some of these other teams like Georgia and Auburn? I think are the big teams of intrigue, where Georgia didn't add a lot in the transfer portal, but they do bank on a lot of returning talent. And Auburn, they made some solid moves out there in the transfer portal. I don't think anything that would just completely light the world on fire. But as we know, there was a little bit of buy-in for Coach Pearl towards back half of the season, and he was able to retain quite a few of those pieces. And some of those guys that returned actually got good minutes out there in the NIT as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at just kind of the makeup of it. And yeah, John Rothstein put out, the data on it. And the more I looked at it, I'm like, yeah, man, this is very interesting, because you do have, like you said, a team like Florida who's kind of the complete outlier here, 87% of their scoring returning from last year. And of course, that's a number one seed. And so you just don't get that very often when it comes to Florida, being in that position. And so the teams like Georgia and Auburn, like even Oklahoma, those are all teams that are like 40% and higher in terms of their retention. And like you said, I think it's seeing if some of these guys who were able to play in some postseason basketball last year, how can they use that to be able to kind of catapult them moving forward? And I think of that group, Auburn fans certainly expect a much better year. If you're missing the tournament this year, which of course has an expanded field, then I think you're going to see the heat start to turn up a little bit on Stephen Pearl. Wasn't really ever going to be the case last year, just because he was going to have that season where they could sort of, okay, this isn't going to be Bruce Pearl. They're not going to get to the Final Four, but can we just kind of keep things consistent? And they struggled with that last year. And whereas Georgia, in all honesty, has been kind of the model of consistency if you really look at it. And we were debating this a couple weeks ago on our show, and people were like, well, what happens if Mike White, doesn't, let's say, get past the first round this year? I'm like, they should have a parade for Georgia, because, it's one of those where they've made the tournament in back-to-back seasons. And this team, a program as a whole, has not made the tournament very often over the past couple of decades. And he's done it in back-to-back seasons. It's been disappointing in terms of the way they finished their season, but they've stayed pretty consistent, especially when you consider what he took over, back in 2022 or whatever. And so I think Georgia's got a roster that should be able to compete in the top half of the SEC. If they do that, they're a guaranteed lock to make the tournament. And so, with guys like that, I think that they have coming back, whether it's Blue Kane, Catching, Smurf, all those guys, it's a very solid roster. I think it's just your perspective of what are the expectations if you're Georgia. To me, that's going to be the biggest question going into the season, because, as long as you're realistic in that you're probably not competing in the Final Four with what you have and the resources and the NIL maybe that's available at Georgia versus, of course, football, Greg, a little bit different there. I think you should probably be pretty happy with what Mike White has done so far, even thrilled maybe to a certain extent. But now that they've set that foundation, that's where having this retention and having, almost 50% of your scoring returning, that should be a good baseline that they can build on coming into this year, and maybe that's where they can, start to get beyond the first round and such.
Yep, I'm right there with you with Georgia. Love the fact that they cranked up the tempo as well. We've never seen a Mike White team play that fast, whether he was at Louisiana Tech, whether he was over at Florida. They absolutely gunned it. Being able to have a lot of guys coming back from that sort of a system, I think is going to be big for them as well. And then on the flip side, I do want to dive in a little bit more on Texas A&M, a team that they bring in PJ Haggerty. I think that's such an intriguing roster. They made the NCAA tournament last year. They've got Buckyball now going on, so we're going to be chatting about that with Blake and so much more on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to get Blake Lovell aboard. He's doing such great work over at Southeastern 16, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. He's got his finger on the pulse of it all throughout this offseason. He does such great work taking a look at the Southeastern Conference, but he really does a great job taking a look at all things college basketball. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell, and there's no question about it. The most mystery of any SEC team right now is LSU because you just don't know who's going to be eligible, but I'm going to throw this out here as well. I feel like Texas A&M, out of teams not named LSU, might be the biggest team of mystery because I love the pickup of PJ Haggerty, but at the same time, that wasn't necessarily the way that Texas A&M played, and that's not necessarily Bucky McMillan's style of play. As for PJ Haggerty, really nice scorer over at Kansas State, Memphis, among others, over the last few seasons, but with Texas A&M last year, it was a little bit more whole square than some of its parts. I want to get your thoughts on this Texas A&M team because if it all formulates and if PJ Haggerty is able to be effective, they're able to continue to run the style. My goodness, I think that the sky's the limit for this team, but I do have a few question marks because it is going to look, in my opinion, a bit different than what Texas A&M did a season ago.
Yeah, this may be one of the highest curiosity teams just in terms of like how the ball is going to be distributed on this team because if you really look at it, right? I mean, you look at maybe what most would project as a starting lineup right now. And in all honesty, like this starting lineup, I think you're going to put right up there in the top of the SEC in terms of feeling pretty good about this first five of Jalen Reese potentially, of course, comes over, as a sophomore now, got a little SEC experience under his belt. Tyshawn Archie, who we know had a really good season last year. I think he's kind of a good fit for Bucky McMillan. And you mentioned PJ Haggerty. I mean, a guy that's just going to score a ton of points. Mbako returns from injury. Cade Phillips returns from injury. That's probably the makeup of your front court. And so I think like that five, if that's how you start in your A&M, you feel pretty good about things. But I just mentioned like there are some ifs when it comes to, Cade Phillips has injury issues. Mbako's coming off an injury and all that. We mentioned him as a potential SEC player last year. And so I think from that standpoint, like there's a lot of what ifs with Texas A&M. But, we always talk about giving coaches the benefit of the doubt, Greg. And I think after year one, you kind of do that with Bucky McMillan and feel like, yeah, they struggled a little bit down the stretch. They started 7-1. They hit a tough part of their schedule, lost some games. Yeah, makes sense. Maybe they just overachieved a little bit. But I think this is a team that overall feels like they've kind of figured out from again, whether it's just resources or whatever, this is the kind of roster we have to build to at least be competitive in the SEC. I said last year, I thought that may be the worst team he would wind up having at Texas A&M. And they won 22 games, won a game in the NCAA tournament. So they got a lot to live up to if that's going to be the case. But I think just overall, they've got a pretty experienced group here. I think Texas A&M maybe, if we look back, once again, we said last year they're the sleeper team maybe. Well, they might be the same scenario this year just based on the roster.
Yep, it's going to be very fun to take a look at this bunch because I can see this going a lot of different ways. And for Texas A&M, they could not guard the three-point arc at home, but away from home, they were one of the best three-point shooting defenses in all of college basketball as well. So that's a team that very much intrigues me for this upcoming season. And Blake, I always love to do this because I know they're over there at Southeastern 16. Obviously, you guys are keyed in on the SEC and you're taking a look on that front so well. But I know that as well, you're taking a look at really the national landscape. And is there a team or two here in the offseason that maybe is not getting the attention that they deserve that you're feeling pretty bullish on outside the SEC?
Well, it's a team that, of course, has what a segue here, Greg, because I wasn't going to necessarily go this route, but man, we just talked about Texas A&M, and Maryland is pretty interesting for a lot of reasons. You and I have talked about Buzz Williams over the years, and obviously did not go well in year one there with the Terps, but if you do kind of look at the roster, I think that he's put together, I don't know that they're going to be, competing with Michigan at the top or anything, but I do think it's one that's gotten a lot better, right? It feels like more of a roster that can have the success they want to have in the Big Ten. And so I have kind of studied Maryland a bit, and I think they are kind of one of those teams that feels like if we're looking at list of potentially most improved, you could see them doing that. I can't say it's going to be aesthetically pleasing, Greg, to watch just because that style is not our favorite most of the time. But, bringing in DJ Wagner, Bishop Boswell, two former SEC guards, you've got guys up front, I think, that certainly feel like they are more Big Ten ready. That's a team I've circled quite a bit just because I am kind of, interested to see how they're able to kind of push this thing forward. The other team, and I don't know necessarily if they're under the radar, but USC to me, is one that I think you look at, and with all the scoring they're going to have back, I mean, I would think they're going to be a top 20 team in the preseason, Greg, but it still feels like it's one where, hey, right, it's USC. Are they getting a lot of talk nationally in the summer or anything like that? Doesn't necessarily feel that way. And of course, football season's coming up not too far from now, so that plays a role. But I am kind of, fascinated to see what the Muss Bus can do there in LA, just with how many guys are going to have returning, guys coming off of injuries, and that kind of stuff. And so it does feel like USC should be one of those teams that should be better than Maryland, but those are two teams, at least, that I've kind of looked at the most when you look at the Big Ten, which, once again, should be right there in terms of, top conference in college basketball, right with the SEC and potentially the Big 12.
Yeah, my goodness, this Maryland roster that they have assembled here in the offseason. They're getting Farrell Payne back. You mentioned DJ Turn It Up Wagner, Tomislav Bujan, double-double machine over at New Mexico last season. Rakis Passamore, I think, has some upside. I'm right there with you. I am feeling very good about them for the upcoming season. But one thing that I always feel better about is getting you on this podcast, Blake, because you do such a great job deciphering this great game of college basketball. You're locked into it all 12 months out of the year. And I know that you join me for a few conference previews throughout the offseason as well. So love the good people at home. Know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media to other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, check out all of our stuff over at Southeastern 16 on YouTube, all of our SEC off-season stuff there. And yeah, everything else college basketball, you can follow me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell.
And Blake doing such an incredible job looking at this sport, and every single time he joins me, on such great insight. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways to be able to throw those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GUnit_81. Keep in mind, letters they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And we are keeping this podcast going every single day here throughout the off season. We're up to over 2,300 straight days without a missed podcast. So, it's going to be money in the bank there. Going to be continuing to get you guys conference preview podcasts. You can expect the Big South and the Big West next week. Those are going to be the two that are going to be on the radar. I did 3 last week, so took a little bit more of a break this week. And with Father's Day, a little bit more of a shortage of guests. So hopefully all of you dads out there are having a great weekend out there. And it's my job to make things a little bit better for the dads, to try to make this the most profitable season ever, though. So that's why I'm coming at you guys every single day. We're getting low with regards to the transfer portal news, what have you. So you're going to continue to get these great guest interviews, and then once we're back in season, fix and analysis on every single game, every single day. So appreciate you tuning in today, and I'll be back with you once you get them out. Thank you.